You know, I try them both. If you want my house, I think the better, you can see everything better from back there. But, you know, you might
See that?
2 minutes.
There will be a third.
Oh, really? Yeah, I hate it right behind me. I can't, I'm afraid they're going to hear my snark.
All right, I'll that's a fair point.
There you know what I mean?
So maybe in this corner.
I totally get that.
Maybe in this corner.
I'm a fan of avoiding snark on camera.
Yeah, it's not a good. Could you imagine you hear my like commentary throughout the entire? It's not probably not appropriate. I think some people would enjoy it, but I think many others would not.
Yeah, I mean, I might be a few months behind on coming from West Philadelphia, which shouldn't be a problem that time of day. It'll be close, 12:40. Unless,
I always find out whatever we need, and never less than like 6 hours.
so that's why I was suggesting.
Yeah.
All right. So we are live.
Yeah, so,
Just like quick thing. All right.
and I'm going to put this.
Thank you. Is this, it's, all charged up.
I was charging it for the last hour. Everybody gets to see us move.
How about like right?
Back here? How am I pointed? How's that?
Perfect. I think that's good.
Okay.
Yep, you can see the podium.
Okay.
What do you think? Maybe.
I think you're fine.
Maybe a little bit more towards the podium.
No, I think you're fine.
It's my bad side, remember.
Turn a little bit to the left. Tiny bit more. Right there. That's all you got.
It is, I know. I keep two coats. I love it. Never be having it.
Yep. I know, really?
Maybe you went skiing. Oh boy.
Oh, what do you mean?
Yeah.
How do we not see on? Oh, okay.
Hey, sometimes you need one of those days.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed.
I know.
Yeah, really.
I'm so annoying. No, you're not.
It is. It's fun. I mean, I was just like, you know, everything, one other person. That's reminds me a little of NASCAR, like everyone else, like, you have to get 2 hours
What?
I used to read and go outside.
He's always here.
I know, I hear you.
Everything. Not 25.
Good.
One's out of the bag.
I can hear what's back this time. It's like I'm going with the short.
And they're still back.
Yeah.
You know what I don't like? Well, that, yeah.
Sorry.
So even some of the people that eat, I mean, like when you bring them, you expect them to be faithful and loyal. Yeah, I think so.
You really got it. Oh, is that right? Yeah, it's true.
They'll be fine.
I love that. So I don't mind. Well, I was introduced in the room today. We slid you over one for my fault. Oh, I knew. I'm gonna blame Sean for that. It was me though. It's excellent.
So I'm looking at
Wait, is this one of your former students?
I love it. I see him here and there. I've been there. You doing well? I was just like, you guys got some controversy, right?
That's the one thing.
You have to. Like, twice I went, I was like, I don't think I want to do this. Like, oh. No, just this.
Good evening. So, I'm going to call to order. This is the Education Committee meeting of the School Board of Upper Dublin, or the Upper Dublin School Board. Did I get this right now? And it is 6:04. So, tonight we have a presentation and then a couple recommendations to talk about after that. So, without further ado, our presentation tonight is on school start times and adolescent sleepiness. And it's a topic that has been in the news for in a number of different areas recently, and it's really time we start talking about it. So Dr. Yanni is going to do the presentation.
Good evening, and thank you, Dr. Ludwig. The topic of adolescence or adolescent sleepiness has been talked about for some time over the years. Recently, I would say probably over the last 2.5 to 3 years, it's really caught the national attention. In Chester County, Unionville-Chadsford has implemented a reversal in their, well, not a reversal, but pushing back their start time. They were the first district to do that in Chester County, and there's some other districts that are looking at this. I want to be really clear before we start. There truly have been no decisions, preliminarily or otherwise, about what our path forward is going to be. But in just a few minutes, we'll talk about a Senate resolution that was passed that is actually mandating a study on this across the state, and there will be some recommendations in the next year. So to be proactive, we're starting the conversation tonight. So just to remind everyone, again, especially for those folks that are not in the room, I think sometimes when we talk about things in presentations, the members of the public think that things are already a foregone conclusion. So this is just starting the conversation. And we're actually going to examine this issue from the whole child perspective, with the idea of school start times as just one strategy to address adolescent sleepiness. Again, we haven't made any decisions, and I really want to thank the EAC. The EAC previously produced a report on this topic, and some of that research is embedded into this presentation tonight. And we really thank that group for the thought work they did around that. So in 2016, the CDC, and I hate when presenters read, but for those of you that are sitting far from the screen, so that not getting enough sleep is common among high school students and is associated with several health risks, including being overweight, drinking alcohol, smoking tobacco, using drugs, as well as poor academic performance. Now, we know that all of those things that I just articulated, that long list, are not necessarily caused by early school start times, but early school start times could be a contributing factor to any one of those concerns. So there were some professional recommendations. The American Academy of Pediatrics really recommend a middle school and high school start time optimally of 8:30 or later. Interesting, when you look at large school systems and small school systems who have taken on this charge, whether it's Unionville-Chadsford or it's Seattle Public School or Fairfax County, Virginia, 8:30 is really, really difficult. The most that people are able to achieve would be between 8 and 8:10. 8:30 creates some issues, whether it's putting elementary students out at the bus stop very, very early, or conversely, really starting the elementary day much later than it is right now. And as a caveat, as a former elementary teacher, morning time is prime real estate, right? I always taught math and writing in the morning because that's when my kids were most energized. But our state senate passed resolution 417. It was right down to the wire. It was actually Dr. Ludwig and Dr. Levinowitz and Mrs. Rothman were at PASA PSBA, and it was right down to the wire. They were trying to get enough support to pass Senate Resolution 417. And that resolution directs the Joint State Government Commission to establish an advisory committee to study this issue and then to provide some recommendations. Now, many times when things leave the local level and they go to the state level, they go into a vacuum. But this, for whatever reason, is not going into a vacuum. This issue or this topic keeps having a resurgence. So every time we think we haven't heard about school start times in a while, all of a sudden we hear about them again. This presentation will be up on the website tomorrow, and we'll send it out also on social media tonight. Linked to that last slide, there is a document that links several different sources, but a lot of information from the Minnesota Sleep Study to highlight some of the things that we talked about and why many school systems are looking at different start times to combat the issue of adolescent sleepiness. Wendy Troxel is a researcher in this field. I'm going to show part of this presentation tonight. Wendy Troxel has spoken at several venues. We were trying to attempt a group of districts to bring her to our region. She's from the University of Pittsburgh, and she really has become one of the front runners, the people at the forefront, really pushing this issue. As you can imagine, for every point that Dr. Troxel brings up, obviously people can bring up counterpoints, but I did want to take just a few minutes and take a look at this brief talk.
It's 6 o'clock in the morning, pitch black outside. My 14-year-old son is fast asleep in his bed, sleeping a restless, deep sleep as a teenager. I flip on the light and physically shake the poor boy awake, because I know that, like ripping off a Band-Aid, it's better to get it over with quickly. I have a friend who yells fire just to rouse her sleeping teen, and another who got so fed up that she had to dump cold water on her son's head just to get him out of bed. Sound brutal, but perhaps familiar? Every morning I ask myself, how can I, knowing what I know and doing what I do for a living, be doing this to my own son? You see, I'm a sleep researcher. So I know far too much about sleep and the consequences of sleep loss. I know that I'm depriving my son of the sleep he desperately needs as a rapidly growing teenager. I also know that by waking him up hours before his natural biological clock tells him he's ready, I'm literally robbing him of his dreams, the type of sleep most associated with learning, memory consolidation, and emotional processing. But it's not just my kid that's being deprived of sleep. Sleep deprivation among American teenagers is an epidemic. Only about 1 in 10 gets the 8 to 10 hours of sleep per night recommended by sleep scientists and pediatricians. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, phew, we're doing good, my kid's getting 8 hours. Remember, 8 hours is the minimum recommendation. You're barely passing. 8 hours is kind of like getting C on your report card. There are many factors contributing to this epidemic, but a major factor preventing teens from getting the sleep they need is actually a matter of public policy, not hormones, social lives, or Snapchat. Across the country, many schools are starting around 7:30 a.m. or earlier, despite the fact that major medical organizations recommend that middle and high schools start no earlier than 8:30 a.m. These early start policies have a direct effect on how much, or really how little, sleep American teenagers are getting. They're also pitting teenagers and their parents in a fundamentally unwinnable fight against their own bodies. Around the time of puberty, teenagers experience a delay in their biological clock, which determines when we feel most awake and when we feel most sleepy. This is driven in part by a shift in the release of the hormone melatonin. Teenagers' bodies wait to start releasing melatonin until around 11 p.m., which is 2 hours later than what we see in adults or younger children. This means that waking a teenager up at 6 a.m. is the biological equivalent of waking an adult up at 4 a.m. Now, on the unfortunate days when I have to wake up at 4 a.m., I'm a zombie, functionally useless. I can't think straight. I'm irritable, and I probably shouldn't be driving a car. But this is how many American teenagers feel every single school day. In fact, many of the, shall we say, unpleasant characteristics that we chalk up to being a teenager, moodiness, irritability, laziness, depression, could be a product of chronic sleep deprivation. For many teens battling chronic sleep loss, their go-to strategy to compensate is consuming large quantities of caffeine in the form of venti frappuccinos or energy drinks and shots. So essentially, we've got an entire population of tired but wired youth. Advocates of sleep-friendly start times know that adolescence is a period of dramatic brain development, particularly in the parts of the brain that are responsible for those higher-order thinking processes, including reasoning, problem-solving, and good judgment. In other words, the very type of brain activity that's responsible for reining in those impulsive and often risky behaviors that are so characteristic of adolescence and that are so terrifying to us parents of teenagers. They know that, like the rest of us, when teenagers don't get the sleep they need, their brains, their bodies, and behaviors suffer with both immediate and lasting effects. They can't concentrate. Their attention plummets. And many will even show behavioral signs that mimic ADHD. But the consequences of teen sleep loss go well beyond the classroom, sadly contributing to many of the mental health problems that skyrocket during adolescence, including substance use, depression, and suicide. In our work with teens from LA Unified School District, we found that teens with sleep problems were 55% more likely to have used alcohol in the past month. In another study with over 30,000 high school students, they found that for each hour of lost sleep, there was a 38% increase in feeling sad or hopeless, and a 58% increase in teen suicide attempts. And if that's not enough, teens who skimp out on sleep are at increased risk for a host of physical health problems that plague our country, including obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. Then there's the risk of putting a sleep-deprived teen with a newly minted driver's license behind the wheel. Studies have shown that getting 5 hours or less of sleep per night is the equivalent of driving with a blood alcohol content above the legal limit. Advocates of sleep-friendly start times and researchers in this area have produced tremendous science showing the tremendous benefits of later start times. The findings are unequivocal, and as a sleep scientist, I rarely get to speak with that kind of certainty. Teens from districts with later start times get more sleep. To the naysayers who may think that if schools start later, teens will just stay up later. The truth is, their bedtimes stay the same, but their wake-up times get extended, resulting in more sleep. They're more likely to show up for school. School absences dropped by 25% in one district, and they're less likely to drop out. Not surprisingly, they do better academically. So this has real implications for reducing the achievement gap. Standardized test scores in math and reading go up by 2 to 3 percentage points. That's as powerful as reducing class sizes by 1/3 fewer students, or replacing a so-so teacher in the classroom with a truly outstanding one. Their mental and physical health improves, and even their
So the first time I heard Wendy Troxel speak, not making light of this, I thought if I had enough sleep as a teenager, I'd be a better driver and I'd be thinner. I think one of the things that strikes teachers and administrators, when you walk through the high school, any high school in America, first thing in the morning, you see a lot of very sleepy, tired, irritable, cranky principals. Principals and other administrators. And one of the things that we talk with kids all of the time about is, what is it that keeps your sort of internal motor going all the time? And we do hear a lot about energy drinks and whatnot because kids are so overscheduled. In our region, I mentioned earlier that Unionville-Chadsford has implemented a later start time as a state college. Radnor, TE, Phoenixville, and all of the districts in Bucks County are looking at and actively studying this issue. And across the nation, Seattle Public Schools and Fairfax County, Virginia, have also implemented later start times. Now, one of the things that Dr. Troxel talks about in her brief TED Talk was that academic achievement has been increased by this. That's one area that I think it's still too early to determine if changing a school start time has an exact effect on achievement. I said that we're looking at this issue from the whole child perspective. So we need to cast a wider net than just looking at school start times. So we need to incorporate sleep hygiene into the health curricula. So we'll be looking at how we can look at what we're teaching in health across grade levels and embed some of information about sleep hygiene into those classes. One of the things that we'll be doing next year that will, I hope to be one of my superintendent goals for next year in working with principals is to really examine the quality and quantity of homework that we're giving students to make sure that we're giving kids meaningful, purposeful work outside of school and not just a lot of work, not packets of papers to complete. We need to look at analysis of students' school schedules. There are some schools that have implemented scenarios where during first period, students can take an online class, or there'll be a 0 period where students could come in a little bit later and do some online options. So we have to look at that. We have to have discussions of students' extracurricular schedules. School is just one part of students' busy lives. Outside of school, we have kids that are on multiple sports teams and in multiple clubs, and the list goes on and on and on. And so one of the things that we need to do is really have some frank discussions about how active and involved our kids are and what that looks like for academics. And then, we have to provide some parent education, some community education about, sleep times and what that means. Some of the statistics saying that waking up a teenager at 6 a.m. is like waking up any one of us at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm still going pretty well, but at 4:45 this morning, I was up, checking road conditions. And after a day or two of that really does start to wear on your psyche, on your body. And so if we're continually putting our students in those conditions, we do have to take a look at what we're doing. So one of the things as we begin this conversation, we need to find out if we have a sleepiness issue, and we're going to actually be asking our students. So we're going to be surveying our current 5th grade students and our middle school and high school students as well. I'll be working with the principals to determine how we can do that. We're going to use a survey that was used that has been validated, used by Unionville Chadds Ford. It takes probably 10 to 15 minutes. And what we'll be doing then is analyzing the results. And what I'd like to do is come back in March and discuss an analysis of those results, and then determine next steps based on data. I have linked in the presentation that will be online. There's a great document about dispelling myths about this issue. On any issue, you always get a backing of supporters and then a backing of naysayers. And some of the naysayers have put some claims out. And so there's a document there that does a really nice job of calling out those myths and addressing them with real facts. I'll end it there for tonight. I'm happy to entertain any questions from Dr. Ludwig or the committee.
First, I just want to thank you for bringing this topic up. Just from my psychology background, I've kind of always known what the importance of sleep and some of the research on sleep. And I think it's really the case that anybody who hears what the research is knows that it's an issue. The real problem with implementation is, how do you do it? What are the logistics? And how do you make it work? But I do applaud that we're beginning this discussion, and that the approach is going to be to look at the data, look at the research, and if there is an issue, to move forward to make sure that we listen to all people's concerns and take them into account as part of trying to figure out if we can come up with a solution.
The one thing I'll add to that, when we talk to our colleagues at Unionville Chadds Ford, they spent several years studying this. So they didn't just one day decide, oh, we're going to push back start times. So they actually studied it. They did an analysis of everything from academics to extracurriculars to sports to transportation, impact it would have on families, impact it would have on students with jobs after school. So there was a really comprehensive study that they did. And the good thing for the rest of us that are starting the conversation now, we can learn from some of the pitfalls that they had. And if you notice tonight, I didn't bring up things like transportation and all those other things that could potentially have either a positive or a negative effect, because I really think we need to dig first and look at the data and say, do we have a sleepiness issue in the district first, and then move there based upon data.
One other point I want to make, then I'm going to open it up for everyone else to make comments, is that when the EAC studied this, they really looked at a very narrow question, which was, can you improve academic performance by changing start times? Unionville Chadds Ford and many other people think that the most important component of this is student health and well-being. It is not trying to change academic performance. And if you make the argument that Upper Dublin is already a pretty high-performing district, then why do we need to improve our performance? And that's not necessarily the reason to be looking at this. So with that, do either of you you three on the education committee have comments or questions?
First off, I would just say, as a parent of two teenagers, I could agree with the fact that I think a later start time would be helpful for them. They were disappointed today that they didn't get the 2-hour delay that they were hoping for. I
tried, I really did.
With that said, I'm curious, the Bucks County schools that you mentioned, is that something collaboratively that they're looking at, not just the one school? When I think about implementation, whereas Chadds Ford and all these other schools are doing it individually, I do think if you can affect more of a region where they're buying in together to the vision and the idea that this would be something beneficial for all students, that would be helpful. I would also be curious to see if school boards, for the same reason, would be able to link arms and see if that's something that would be a stronger voice, not only locally, but again to even the state as they're considering it as well.
So to answer the first part of your question, all 13 districts in Bucks County, as a collective, that joint superintendent group, they are looking at this issue and what it looks like in Central Bucks versus what it would look like in a very small district like Bristol Borough or Morrisville. And one of the things, we're going to be doing some cross collaboration. Several of us will be attending not only the Montgomery County Superintendent's meeting, but the Bucks County meeting, so that we are kept apprised of what they're doing. In terms of boards working together, one of the things that we've been talking about as a superintendent's group in the intermediate unit is to have a forum where we can discuss some hot topics and bring several board members so that we can have some conversations, about some of the big issues that are ahead of us. This may be one of them that we can see if there's an appetite to discuss it on a broader level.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. I think the distinction between academics and student well-being, I think is important to recognize. What is it really that we want to address? I know there's also a group of, certainly in high school here, who gets up way earlier for their athletics activities. And as a group, I think they're doing well. Maybe there's something there that's worth looking at. And I think the other piece is, what is really the thing we want to address, because there are other things like scheduling, school year length, and things like that, that all come into this mix. And I wouldn't want to just focus on one specific item.
Right. And to your point, school start time is really just one strategy in a whole landscape of things that we can look at to positively impact kids. And I think of all the things that we could do, it's one of the things that takes the most amount of work to get it done. When we look at scheduling options or how we're assigning homework or long-term projects or what have you, I think there are some more immediate actions that we can be taking as we look at the whole landscape.
Another question I'm going to ask Mr. Schultz, actually, if you don't mind. This is more of curiosity. So when we have a scheduled 2-hour delay, that pretty much puts us right at that 8:30, meaning that when we know the night before they get those extra hours. Have you noticed any difference in regards to the students as they come on campus?
Oh, absolutely. Sure, the energy and everything like that is better. If we have a quirk in the schedule where afternoon classes meet in the morning and morning classes meet in the afternoon, you get the same kind of sense for your afternoon classes. So, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this that I won't get into right now, but there's no doubt that when the students come in rested, it's a different ballgame in the building.
And I think along these lines, we would have to also very clearly explore, because we have 3-tier busing. So we have high school runs, middle school runs, and elementary runs. What would be the potential impact of delaying high school start time? Would we delay just high school? Would it be high school and middle school? Can we achieve 2-tier busing versus 3? There are many things that need to be explored before we can even make some preliminary decisions. But it is a topic that is going to continue to garner much attention, at least here in the Commonwealth.
I think this is a really helpful topic. One of the things that you mentioned was sort of the curriculum angle and putting more information about sleep hygiene into the health curriculum. I think that's a great idea. I also, think that there's a piece of that health and development around a child's brain development and their own understanding that at that time we are also going through a lot of cognitive changes and judgment's not always great, making a decision to go to bed versus staying up and doing other things. So just as a consideration potentially to that. And I'm also curious, would we consider at some point potentially engaging some colleges and universities in a conversation around are their expectations of our students realistic? Because if we need to send children to them that have sports and music and theater and academic this and that, I mean, there are really only so many hours of the day, and it seems like it's not just a mindset shift that has to happen here. It may need to happen there as well.
To your last point, Mrs. Franczyk, for the last several years, superintendent groups have tried to get admissions officers out to talk to high school administration and high school teachers about what they're really looking for. Many colleges and universities are not willing to come out and talk about that. Not just here in Upper Dublin, but when I've talked to students in previous districts, the number one stressor is getting into a good college. And when you really dig down, where is that pressure coming from? It's not necessarily coming from parents. It's not necessarily coming from school. It's coming from the perception of what it takes to get into the university or college that they want to go to. And it's a very competitive process. And trying to break into that circle of admissions officers and counselors to have some really frank conversations has proven to be difficult, but we just keep, it's like water. We just keep going back at it time and time again. And finally, we'll ask enough that they will engage in those conversations with us.
Was there any data on having 1 day a week start late? I mean, when I went to high school, every Wednesday we started 2 hours late. Although everybody walked to school when I went to school. So there was no transportation.
I'll go both ways.
Yeah, so was there any data for looking into starting school one day a week?
There are some school districts that do late arrivals on a regular basis. I haven't seen any that necessarily as much as once a week, but that, one of the things, I'm sure at some point in my tenure here, we'll look at the high school schedule, and I know that gives Mr. Schultz some shivers, because, transforming a high school schedule is no small feat, but I think that's one of the other areas that we have to look at. And particularly look at, can we do something with some, hybrid online courses that maybe run, and kids could take that during, a first period, to see if that is also something that's a viable option. So I think all of the options are on the table as we, begin this exploratory phase.
We have a couple other things on the agenda, but maybe we should take community questions now about this topic while we're still on it. 4-minute rules in effect.
As if my notes aren't messed up enough as it is. Okay, so Jenny Patella, Amler. I assume, so the EIC, which I think it would have been nice also to maybe see their report maybe in one of those town halls that we've discussed working on, because I think they came up with a lot of information. I understand their question was limited, but there was a naysayer that went into it as a naysayer and then came out with it and was like, wait, the cost involved for 1 hour, a lot of time and effort going into 1 hour difference. A 2-hour delay is 2 hours, not 1 hour. And what was interesting is that when we're asking those questions of the students, I think we have to be careful how we ask them, because when a couple of people asked their teenagers, would you like to start later? The answer was, absolutely, I want to start later. But you have to go now an hour later. They're like, oh wait, no, I want to get out still 2:15. They kind of like that 2:15. And I know, and I also was wondering, do we have any information or statistics about what's happening at State College and Union Transport? Are they getting more sleep? Because that was the other thing, is that just because they were going into school 1 hour later, there was no proof that the kids were actually getting that extra hour of sleep. They were actually staying up a little later because they still had their sports, their homework, and everything else. So it wasn't gaining an hour, it just was shifting the entire day, 1 hour. And I can, from a personal standpoint, I can tell you the hardest person I get out of bed is my 4th grader. Is late almost every single day at Fort Washington Elementary School, and I would hate to have to get her up at 7:30 in the morning because she's a nightmare.
Anyway, so everyone's life is different and their kids are different, and Lord knows we all need some more sleep. I only slept 4 hours last night. So, I also want to ask if we have to be careful. The problem is I find with my teenagers is screen time. If screen time's late, then even if they go to bed at a proper time, it's not the same. So if they're on that phone or whatever, so like we unhook earlier than bedtime. And that's all. With the homework on the Chromebooks, that might be coming into play. And I know you're not gonna love this, but one thing interesting, I know it's a total pain in the neck for Sandy Run kids, or like it was a tough sell, was the 7th grade schedule. But one thing interesting about it is that it rotates. So you're never having English first period every single day. It rotates through. So you only have English 4 out of the 5 days, and you have a first period on Monday, you have a second period Tuesday. So that might be an interesting way to look at where you're not, you might end up with gym or study hall that first period, where you do get that kind of what Stan was saying, you get that 1 day a week where you're studying. So I don't know if that's a question or a statement, but something to look at. So I think that was all those questions about that. Thanks.
Joan Cousins, Fort Washington. I'm just wondering if we can charge the EAC with going back to do a little more research on some of the other topics instead of just that one limited question. And then if we're talking about student health and well-being and wellness, and I think we kind of need to look at the broader picture of what we do here in the district, more outdoor time, things like that, more brain breaks for the kids, what we serve in the cafeteria to our students. You know, if we're really going into the whole health and well-being, I think that those are easy solutions and easy fixes. And then I'm assuming if we are talking about later start times, that's like teacher contract issues and things of that nature. So I don't know if anyone's even talked to teachers about this at all. Just curious.
Anita Brister, Fort Washington. I just want to say I was kind of glad to see that the little slide that said it's more than a matter of school start time. So, it sounds like, as Dr. Ghani said, it would be difficult, probably because of transportation and maybe also because of sports, to do an 8:30 start time. So, and this is all theoretical at this point, but let's say you did an 8 o'clock start time. So that's better, but I think you're talking about 40 minutes. And yet kids maybe have a 3-4 hour sleep deficit. But what I'm glad to see, because this is what I was thinking about. I was thinking, and my kids, as most people know, are older. They're young adults, mature now, young, mature adults. Some days they're mature. But what kept my kids up was the homework. Okay, well, it wasn't just the homework. It was the homework and the activities and sports. Okay, and in some cases where kids aren't doing sports, I can tell you that most kids in this district are doing something. My daughter was not doing a lot of sports. She did some in middle school, not high school, but she did 12 years of dance, which is a commitment in and of itself. And yes, we all, as families and kids, we choose these things. But I think one thing that is good that could come out of this, no matter how you go on the start time, is what I saw as a problem as a parent started in the high school, as much as I loved the high school, because that's where the homework, in the middle school you've got teams, and the teachers are very well aware, or they seem to be pretty well aware, of the overall homework picture, because they talk to the other teachers on the team. In the high school, it seems a little more difficult. How would an English teacher know what a science teacher is giving? So I don't have the answer how to solve that, because it's not a team situation. But I'm just saying, it was not unusual at all for my kids to have a solid 4 hours of homework. And they weren't stupid kids, but that's a lot of homework. So I think you have to, if that's still a problem, unless it's completely changed, I think that's something worth looking at. And I don't have the answer how to solve it, because the teachers would have to talk to other teachers, but since it's not a team approach, not really sure how that happens. All right, that's it. Okay, thank you for the questions. Dr. Yanni, do you want to respond to some of them?
Sure. So one of the questions was, have we talked to teachers about this? And that will be a conversation that will be had. There's not really an entanglement. The teacher's contract doesn't specify start and end times of the day. It just specifies how many hours of work. But of course, as we go down this path of study and everything, that will be a conversation that we have with with our teachers. Another question was about the EAC, and one of the things the EAC group as a think tank, I think will be amenable perhaps in the future to look and broaden that question so that it has a little bit broader of a scope. And one of the other things about homework in the high school, we're using Schoology, and there is a function in Schoology that a teacher can press a button and see what their kids are being assigned in other classes. And we're going to be spending some time with teachers on how to use that function because it's really invaluable. So if I'm an English teacher and I want to give a test on Thursday and I can look at my students and say, wow, I have a bunch of students that have 2 other tests that day, I can then either decide I'm going to give my test early or a day late so that we're not slamming kids with multiple big assessments or multiple big projects on any given day. Because at the middle school, in the teaming structure, you have those conversations naturally. Much more difficult at the high school, but through the use of technology, we can actually work to rectify that problem.
A couple other things, I'm trying to go through some of these. With regard to the sleep survey, how you ask questions is really important in any kind of survey. The survey that Dr. Yanni has discussed is not one where you ask, what would you like? It's not a preference, it's not a vote. It is questions about when you go to sleep, when you get up, do you fall asleep doing your homework? I mean, it's questions like that that get at sleepiness without getting at what's your preference. And so that's the basic data. So that was one question. Is there evidence for the school districts that have changed? I really haven't looked at the evidence of State College, what they have found. Unionville-Chadsford, who is the first district in this region to have made the change, they made it a year and a half ago. So they have a full year with a new schedule. Now they moved, I'm not sure what they started at before, but they only moved to 8. They did not move to 8:30. And after a year, they found they definitely found kids were getting more sleep. So when you use that survey and you ask when you go to sleep and things like that, they found kids were definitely getting more sleep. They weren't getting, if they moved the time 40 minutes, which I'm not sure if that's exactly what it was or not, then they would find kids were getting 20 minutes more sleep. So it's not the full amount of time, but they did find that they were more awake, more engaged, more attentive in morning classes. Another thing that I have read in some of the literature was when you've done school start times, if you do it without the accompanying educational piece for both kids and parents, like sleep hygiene, things like turning your devices off an hour before you go to sleep, screen time issues, all those things, that those go hand in hand with changing the times. And if you don't reinforce it with good practices, you don't get as much benefit. Now, again, it's hard to know exactly what any one school will find. The rotating schedule is a good idea, so that that you don't have the same schedule, same class early in the morning. Let's see, what else? I think that's most of the issues. Does anybody else have any other comments with regard to the community input? All right. Okay, thank you.
Oh. If I could just say one more thing, I think when we put the presentation up on the website, we can also add the link to the EAC report so that the full text of that report is out as well. Yeah.
All right, now back to our two recommendations. One is on student activities, one is on conferences. So each one of those, let's start with student activities, which is field trips. I don't know that we have to go through every one of them. Is there anything of particular importance to point out, either Dr. Yanni or Dr. Miner? I don't know. You know of any of them? Does anybody have questions?
Okay, just a quick question. The difference in cost to the district for subs between the German exchange and the Spanish exchange, is that the timing of the trip?
I believe it's timing a number of days. And it may be additionally number of staff involved.
So I think I remember this from a past year when we had some questions about that. That the Spanish trip could not, I mean, the German exchange, the students from here go there in June. So it's after school, and we talked about whether there was any way to move the Spanish exchange so that it did not cover a big school period. And based on their schedules, if I remember correctly, the answer was there was no real way to schedule it outside of our school year. So I think that accounts for the differences. And
that's exactly right. We tried again, and there is no way to move that so that our students are not missing as much school.
Any other questions, Mr. Rossi?
Yes, it also looks like there's 3 teachers going for the German versus 2 for the Spanish. Right? That could contribute to the cost.
And that's the other way around. So it may be that there are only, I don't know the number of students, it's 20 versus 25. That's probably why there's a difference in the number of chaperones.
I'm looking at the other costs. Sorry.
Anything else? If not, we will move that forward to the legislative meeting. Okay, the other part is conferences. Is there any questions on the conferences? If not, we will move that forward also. Okay, and is there any community input on the last 2 items? Conferences or field trips? If not, I think that I will just announce that the next Education Committee meeting is Monday, March 11th, here. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.